Well, good morning, faithful listener, and welcome to the Bible Explained podcast. Today we're going to be reading 2 Kings chapter 8 and talking about the Shunamite woman once again, and also Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, dying, and how Elisha predicts it. So we're going to get into those topics today, so stay tuned. So I'm about to show you guys the Lion of Judah tee, but I actually have another t-shirt coming out as well. And this one is for you crazy tea drinkers. Because I have something for the coffee drinkers. You know, I have the 7 Weeks coffee, which you guys should all check out, obviously, because it's a great coffee brand. Link in description. But I don't have anything for you tea drinkers. And I've been looking into tea affiliates, tea companies to maybe start offering something on the podcast relating to tea, and I can't find anything. But I wanted something for you tea drinkers. And so now, instead of getting tea for you guys, you're going to get a t-shirt. So that's going to be available soon. And I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you guys. But let's go ahead and read 2 Kings 8, 1 through 15. And this is the story of the death of the king of Syria. I'll be reading as I usually do from the WEB version. So grab your cup of coffee for you coffee drinkers, or for you absolutely crazy tea drinkers that like tea better than coffee. Grab your cup of tea. Let's go ahead and read 2 Kings 8, 1 through 15. And like I said, I'll be reading from the WEB. Now Elisha had spoken to the woman whose son he had restored to life, saying, "Arise and go, you and your household, and stay for a while wherever you can, for Yahweh has called for a famine. It will also come on the land for 7 years." The woman arose and did according to the man of God's word. She went with her household and lived in the land of the Philistines for 7 years. At the end of 7 years, the woman returned from the land of the Philistines. Then she went out to beg the king for her house and for her land. Now the king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, "Please tell me all the great things that Elisha has done." As he was telling the king how he had restored to life him who was dead, behold, the woman whose son he had restored to life begged the king for her house and for her land. Gehazi said, "My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored to life." When the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed to her a certain officer, saying, "Restore all that was hers, and all the fruits of the field since the day that she left the land, even until now." Elisha came to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, was sick. He was told, "The man of God has come here." The king said to Hazael, "Take a present in your hand and go and meet the man of God and inquire of Yahweh by him, saying, 'Will I recover from this sickness?'" So Hazael went to meet him and took a present with him, even of every good thing of Damascus, 40 camels' burden, and came and stood before him and said, "Your son Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, has sent me to you, saying, 'Will I recover from this sickness?'" Elisha said to him, "Go and tell him, you will surely recover. However, Yahweh has shown me that he will surely die." He settled his gaze steadfastly on him until he was ashamed. Then the man of God wept. Hazael said, "Why do you weep, my lord?" He answered, "Because I know the evil that you will do to the children of Israel. You will set their strongholds on fire, and you will kill their young men with the sword, and will dash their little ones in pieces, and rip up their pregnant women." Hazael said, "But what is your servant, who is but a dog, that he could do this great thing?" Elisha answered, "Yahweh has shown me that you will be king over Syria." Then he departed from Elisha and came to his master, who said to him, "What did Elisha say to you?" He answered, "He told me that you would surely recover." On the next day, he took a thick cloth, dipped it in water, and spread it on the king's face, so that he died. Then Hazael reigned in his place. If you hear hammering or sawing in the background, I'm sorry, that's my husband. He's actually home, which he almost never is when I'm recording, and he's in our garage, which is right next to my office, and he is building something, actually for our dog, who is getting so old he can't jump up on things anymore. So my husband is building him a ramp so he can walk up to the window instead of like jumping on the bench that is sitting there by the window. Now he can walk up it. But anyway, in verse 1, it says that Elisha had spoken to the woman whose son he had restored to life. And this is talking about the Shunamite woman. And she was a very kind woman who supported Elisha's ministry. She even built him his own room so that he could go to it whenever he needed to. And Elisha ended up praying that she'd be able to have a son, because she was not able to have a son because her husband was quite old. So God blessed the Shunamite woman with a son. But then this son ended up growing up and dying when he was just a little boy. And this woman had so much faith that she didn't even tell anybody that her son had died. Instead, she takes him up to the room of Elisha. Elisha was not there, and she went and got Elisha. And Elisha came back, prayed to God multiple times so that God would heal this little boy. And that is the story of the Shunamite woman. So Elisha is still friends with her and her family. And he tells her, he says, "Arise and go, you and your household, and stay for a while wherever you can. For Yahweh has called for a famine. It will also come on the land for 7 years." So Elisha wants to, once again, make sure that this woman and her family are safe. So he tells her, this famine's going to be bad. It's going to happen for 7 years. There's not going to be any food. So please go somewhere else and live there for as long as you can, because this famine will last for 7 years. So the woman listens to the man of God, and she goes and lives with the Philistines for those 7 years. It says at the end of the 7 years, the woman returned from the land of the Philistines, and she went out to beg the king for her house and for her land. So the way the laws worked back in these days was if an Israelite left their land to go live in a foreign country, that means that they gave up their land to Israel, because their land was supposed to belong to people who lived inside of Israel. So because this woman left for 7 years and lived in a foreign country, by the laws at this time, she had forfeited her land completely, and it would have probably belonged to the king or to whoever the king appointed to have that land. So now that she's back from Philistia, she needs to beg King Jehoram for her land back. And I think the reason the Shunamite woman went to go beg the king for the land and not the Shunamite woman's husband was because it's very possible that her husband had died when they lived in Philistia, because they lived there for 7 years. And as we know from the story, her husband was rather old. But because this woman has her son, who Elisha raised from the dead, she has claim to that inheritance once again, even if her husband has died, because everything that belonged to her husband now belongs to their son. And it says in verse 4 that the king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, "Please tell me all the great things that Elisha has done." So the king was, at this point in time, fascinated with Elisha and all of the miracles that Elisha had performed. So this begs the question, when did all of this take place? Because there was a famine mentioned several chapters back. You remember the episode I did with the death in the pot? I believe that was 2 Kings 4. Yeah, it was. If you turn back to 2 Kings 4, verse 38, it says, "Elisha came again to Gilgal. There was a famine in the land, and the sons of the prophets were sitting before him. And he said to his servant, 'Get the large pot and boil stew for the sons of the prophets.' And one went out into the field to gather herbs and found a wild vine and gathered up a lapful of the wild gourds from it and came and cut them up into the pot of stew, but he didn't recognize them. So they poured it out for the men to eat. And as they were eating some of the stew, they cried out and said, 'Man of God, there is death in the pot.' And they could not eat it. But he said, 'Bring some meal.' So he threw it into the pot, and he said, 'Serve it to the people that they may eat.' And there was nothing harmful in the pot." So that's a story of a famine that took place several chapters back, a very, very bad famine, to the point that the servant couldn't gather anything from the wild because there was nothing to gather. So he's like gathering like poison plants. And not purposeful. There is nothing malicious about this, most likely. Just ignorance, I suppose, on the part of the servant. But that story talks about a famine that took place that was quite bad. And that was several chapters back. So a lot of people actually believe that this story in 2 Kings 8 that we talked about today took place at the same time as that last famine previously mentioned, because Gehazi here is sitting with the king. And we know that Gehazi, in 1 Kings 5, at the end of the chapter, actually got leprosy. He got leprosy because he sinned against God, and a leper was typically treated as an outsider. They were supposed to live outside the camp, and so a king most likely would not be having any close relationship with a leper. So this implies that Gehazi did not have leprosy yet. Here's what it says in verse 4 of 2 Kings 8. Now the king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, "Please tell me all the great things that Elisha has done." And so he was telling the king how he had restored to life him who is dead. And behold, the woman whose son he had restored to life begged the king for her house and her land. Gehazi said, "My lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son whom Elisha restored to life." So it doesn't seem like Gehazi has leprosy at this point, unless God healed Gehazi, and we never heard that story, or unless this king didn't care that Gehazi had leprosy and still just wanted to talk to him and hear about all the things that Elisha had done. And I guess that could be possible. But my theory is that this story takes place right after 2 Kings chapter 4. That just makes the most sense to me. But anyway, as Gehazi is talking to King Jehoram about all the cool things that Elisha did, including raising a little boy from the dead, lo and behold, here comes in the Shunamite woman with her son to beg for her land back. So it was like providential. God was taking care of this Shunamite woman completely. And Gehazi is like, "Hey, king, this is the kid I was telling you about that Elisha raised from the dead. He's right here. Isn't that crazy?" And the king is so excited to meet somebody that Elisha raised from the dead that he gives the Shunamite woman everything she asked for. He gives her back every bit of the land. It says in verse 6, when the king asked the woman, she told him. So she told the story too. And the king appointed to her a certain officer, saying, "Restore all that was hers and all the fruits of the field since the day that she left the land, even until now." So that is how excited King Jehoram was to hear about Elisha raising somebody from the dead. But this also shows a little bit about King Jehoram, because he had very little faith throughout much of his life. He never really trusted in God, and he never really trusted that Elisha was prophesying the words of God. So it's kind of sad, actually, that even though Jehoram had this fascination with Elisha, he never really had a lot of faith. But after this, it mentions that Elisha went to Damascus in verse 7. And Damascus was in Syria, and we have no clue why Elisha went there. Maybe God told him to go. And it says that Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, was sick. And he was told, "The man of God has come here." So the king says to Hazael, "Take a present in your hand and go and meet the man of God and inquire of Yahweh by him, saying, 'Will I recover from this sickness?'" Now this story has to take place after everything Syria did to Israel in the past chapters, because this is the end of Ben-Hadad's life. And we know that Ben-Hadad was the king of Syria when he was targeting Israel and doing all sorts of nasty things. But he had heard of Elisha because of the wars that he had with Israel, because Elisha was prophesying and revealing secret information that the king had to the king of Israel. And so the king of Israel was able to dodge all of Ben-Hadad's attacks. And King Ben-Hadad was like, what the heck? Who is revealing all this information? And he finds out it's Elisha, the prophet, who is revealing secret information, even though Elisha wasn't even in the room with him. So he knew of Elisha's fame, not to mention Naaman, one of Ben-Hadad's most reliable officers, ended up getting healed of leprosy by Elisha. So yeah, Ben-Hadad knew of Elisha, and so he's excited when he hears that Elisha had come into Damascus, the capital of Syria, because he's very sick. And now he can inquire of Yahweh, not his gods, but Yahweh, whether or not he will heal from his sickness. And this is the first time we see Ben-Hadad even remotely interested in Yahweh at all. So Ben-Hadad sends one of his servants named Hazael, or maybe Hazel, I'm not really sure. But Hazael is the son of nobody. And that's actually from an archaeological dig. They found something that said that about Hazael. So in other words, he was a very low-ranking officer in the army or a servant of some sort. But Hazael is tasked by the king to go find Elisha and ask if the king will get better. So it says Hazael went to meet Elisha and took a present with him, even of every good thing of Damascus, 40 camels' burden. So 40 camels worth of goods were given to Elisha from the king. I can't even imagine what was on those camels, probably a little bit of everything. But it says that Hazael came and stood before him with this gift. And he says, "Your son Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, has sent me to you saying, 'Will I recover from this sickness?'" And Elisha said to him, "Go and tell him, you will surely recover." But he adds, "However, Yahweh has shown me that he will surely die." And people wonder when reading this. They say, did Elisha just tell Hazael to lie to the king? That's not really a prophecy if you're lying. Like, did Elisha lie here? Well, actually, no, he didn't lie, because the king was going to recover from the sickness. He was going to get better. But Hazael was going to kill him. So even though, yes, he would recover from the sickness, possibly overnight, he was going to die very shortly after that, because Hazael was going to kill him. And it says in verse 11, Elisha settled his gaze steadfastly on Hazael until he was ashamed. Then the man of God wept. So Elisha stares down Hazael until it gets deeply uncomfortable for both of them. Until Elisha is embarrassed, is what it says. And then suddenly Elisha just starts weeping, and Hazael's like, what just happened? Are you okay? Why do you weep, my lord? And Elisha answers, "Because I know the evil that you will do to the children of Israel. You will set their strongholds on fire. You will kill their young men with the sword. You will dash their little ones into pieces, and you will rip up their pregnant women." And after hearing this, Hazael's like, "I am but a dog. How could I do this great thing?" And Elisha answers, "Yahweh showed me that you will be king over Syria." So Hazael takes this information home with him, and he goes to the king who is sick, and the king asks, "Okay, what did Elisha say to you?" And Hazael says, "He told me you will definitely recover from your sickness." But then the next day, Hazael sneaks into the king's chambers, dips a thick towel into water, and suffocates Ben-Hadad to death. And then Hazael takes the throne for himself. And I don't know exactly how he did that. It doesn't go into detail about that, but Hazael was successful in taking the throne, usurping it for himself. And you might wonder, did Elisha almost give the go-ahead for Hazael to kill this king? I would say no. In fact, reading this, it kind of seems to me like this was pre-planned murder, because you don't just one day wake up and decide, you know what, I'm going to kill the king today. The king is very guarded. It's got to be a pre-planned thing, especially if you're going to kill somebody as important as the king. So Hazael probably already had this whole thing planned out, probably even before he went to go visit Elisha. He probably was planning this in his head. And I bet you Elisha revealed his deepest, darkest secret, probably in the hopes that Hazael would change his mind. But of course, Hazael has free will. Even though God knows everything that's going to happen on earth, we still have free will. God can see into the future. He knows how we are going to act. So when he tells somebody like Elisha or other prophets how somebody is going to act, that doesn't take away that person's free will. God just knows the future, and knows everything that's going to happen. And sometimes he reveals the plans of other people. And sometimes maybe he stops the plans of other people or halts the plans of other people. We don't know exactly how God works behind the scenes, but people have free will. God gave people free will all the way back in the Garden of Eden. The whole point of putting the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the Garden of Eden was to give Adam and Eve free will. They could choose. Do we want to live in perfection with God forever? Or do we want to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and become sinners? They chose. We want to eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God has always given people free will because he does not want robots following him. He wants people to choose to follow him. Just like how I want my husband to choose to do something nice for me. You know, if I ask him to do it and he's just like doing it to like comply or make me happy, then it just like ruins it. You know, I want him to do it because he wants to do it. So yeah, it's the same thing with God. We have free will, and Hazael, even though God knows the future and knew what Hazael was going to do, Hazael had the free will to choose to do it or not. And he chose to do it. And you know what? Elisha never revealed how Hazael was going to become the king. He just said, you will become the king and you're going to do some really nasty things. God revealed it to me. And maybe if Hazael would have changed his heart and wouldn't have killed the king, then most likely he would have become king anyway because it was already destined for him to become the king. So Elisha never revealed how Hazael was going to become the king. Hazael was already planning to murder this king. To me, it seems almost obvious that he was. And maybe on Elisha's part, it was a last-ditch effort to try to reach Hazael so that he would not murder the king, firstly, and secondly, would not do these terrible things to the Israelites that he's about to do. So I haven't read a review in quite a while, and I like to read these sometimes because you guys take the time to write them, and they're just so kind. And so I'd like to read one from Danny. This is on Apple Podcasts, and he says, if you're looking for a podcast that makes the Bible easy to understand while keeping things lighthearted and relatable, Jen does an incredible job. She breaks down scripture in a way that feels natural and conversational, explaining deep biblical truths without overwhelming you. What makes this podcast stand out is Jen's ability to connect faith with real life. She doesn't overcomplicate things. She keeps it simple, clear, and full of encouragement. Whether you're new to the Bible or have been reading it for years, you'll find her insights both refreshing and practical. Jen's tone is warm and inviting, making each episode feel like you're sitting down with a friend who genuinely wants to help you grow in your faith. If you've ever felt intimidated by the Bible or just want a fresh perspective, this podcast is a must listen. Well, thank you, Danny. That is such a kind review, and I like hearing that my tone is warm and inviting. I never considered myself warm and inviting before. I'm sure some of you guys have heard that I've mentioned this before, but I used to get bullied for my voice back in middle school and high school. People always told me I had such a high-pitched, annoying voice, and so I was really, I was very self-conscious about my voice. I actually developed a stutter in high school that added to things, and you guys actually might hear me stuttering on the podcast. I still have the stutter, and I have to pull myself out of it sometimes when I'm doing the Bible Explained. But yeah, thank you so much for that review. It's very, very kind, and I appreciate all of your guys' reviews. But faithful listeners, thank you so much for being here. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. As always, happy listening, and God bless.